the branch. Sorry, I should say that we just had the message for recording, so hopefully that's okay with everyone. I'm Shona Leonard, the branch administrator. We'd like to welcome Jake Young from the CIPD. Jake, you've been with the CIPD since 2018 and you're a research associate. Mm-hmm. And I read up previously, you've done a master's degree in social science research methods in Nottingham, and an undergraduate in criminology and sociology. It sounds very interesting. So we welcome you to tell us about your research on resilience, mental well-being and virtual teams. So over to you, Jake.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this branch event. And thanks very much for giving me the chance to speak about some recent CIPD research that we've been doing. So I'm Jake Young. I'm a researcher at CIPD. And I'll be focusing today on, in particular, 3 of our recent evidence reviews. So the first will focus on employee resilience. The second is looking at mental well-being and digital working. And then the third is thinking about developing effective virtual teams. So I was working pretty closely with colleagues at CIPD, in particular Johnny Gifford, on these projects, as well as colleagues from SEBMA, which is the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. So we'll dive into the content. So for a bit of context, over the past year or so, as everybody knows, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced organizations to make dramatic changes to how they operate, and staff having to navigate new ways of working and changing personal lives. And we already know that work pressure can increase in tough economic times, as employees are sometimes expected to do more with less. We also know that the UK lags behind many other countries when it comes to providing a good work-life balance for staff. So if you combine this with concerns about health and safety, social isolation, returning to work, furlough, it's no surprise that there's been a much greater interest in the well-being of employees during such tumultuous and uncertain times. So what this does is it provides researchers at CIPD a really good opportunity to look at the best available evidence on these ideas. And as I said, focusing particularly on resilience, well-being and effective virtual teams. So as I said, these challenging times require employees to display to be able to cope with adversity and to display resilience. So resilient employees are widely believed to be able to cope better with stress, adverse events at work, organizational change, things like that. And they are in turn not only expected to perform better, but to be more committed to their organization and satisfied with their job overall. This is not the only focus of the session. As I mentioned, given that organizations have had to adopt new ways of working and look set to continue to do so moving forward, there have been growing concerns about how new methods, so thinking about using digital technologies, things like that, can affect well-being. So there are questions about whether working remotely provides employees with the freedom to balance their working life and their home life, or whether it can create a blurring between the two as staff feel pressure to be kind of always on, tethered to their workstation. So as well as the mental health side of things, it's really important to think about virtual teams. Virtual teams aren't a new phenomenon. They've been around for ages, especially as we have a kind of more global teams and global work, but they are now as with digital working, they are becoming much more prevalent and look to continue to do so. So we wanted to think in particular about the challenges they face and how to manage them to become as effective as possible. So as I said, it's a really relevant time for us to explore the evidence on these three areas. And there is quite a lot of information to get through. So as I said, it's three different evidence reviews that we conducted, but I'll do my best to kind of make those digestible and link the three of those nicely. So a bit of context on our evidence. I've said evidence reviews a number of times, so I should explain what these are. So at the core of CIPD's purpose are the concepts of being principles-led, evidence-based, and outcomes-driven. And these are key to the knowledge and the values and the behaviors which we think should underpin today's people profession and help us prepare professionals for what's coming and to succeed and shape a changing world of work. So what exactly do we mean by evidence-based then? So it comes from this idea of evidence-based practice. And this concerns the idea that we can make good decisions if we think critically, but also draw on the best available evidence. So, so relying less on things like anecdotes and personal experience, received wisdom, sources that on their own may not be trustworthy enough. And instead, evidence-based practice draws on four sources in particular. So those are scientific literature, organizational data, stakeholder values and concerns, and professional expertise. And as you can see here, it's a really clear and established process. And what it does is it allows us to ask practical questions and make more effective decisions. So in the case of employee resilience then, we wanted to explore not only what we mean when we refer to employee resilience, but why it's important, i.e., does it influence organizational outcomes? So we also wanted to explore its drivers so that we can use these factors in order to increase resilience amongst staff. And so through engaging with the best available evidence on employee resilience, so that was conducting a really thorough, robust, systematic review. It's not simply a literature review, it's really thorough. And so we feel confident in the kind of recommendations that we're making. So through doing this, we sought to answer these questions. So as I said, we need to think about how we actually, what we mean when we refer to resilience. So it is a firmly established topic and can be used as a buzzword. So it's really important we're clear about what we mean when we use it. So psychological resilience generally means a person's ability to rebound or recover from adversity or to stay mentally and physically healthy through traumatic events. Employer resilience is also established in research, and it's described as the capacity to thrive rather than just survive in high stress environments. What's clearly different and something that we've not focused on here is the idea of organizational resilience. And this tends to refer to how organizations can weather financial hardship or turbulent markets or other such difficulties. And then, as I mentioned, a really important question and key reason for interest in constructs like this is why is it so important? Why should we pay it attention? And to answer this question, we often look at the relationship between, say, in this case, resilience and organizational outcomes. So in terms of the evidence, there is really strong evidence to show that resilience is a strong driver of both positive and negative mental health indicators. So these include subjective well-being, life satisfaction, proactive work behavior, and organizational commitment. Employee resilience is also found to reduce the likelihood of clinically recognized disorders of anxiety and depression, increase sleep quality, and reduce suicidal thoughts in some contexts. And then if we think from a more psychological approach, the job demands resources, or JDR model, is really important here. So this says that we have personal resources that include various practical and social things that help us manage job demands. And so these resources can include supervisor support, team cohesion, and autonomy. And resilience helps people to protect and recoup these resources. So it's a key enabler for us to maintain the work conditions that we need to stay healthy and productive. So I think it's fair to say that employee resilience is definitely something that HR and people managers should be seeking to understand and to support. So there we go. There's a brief overview of the most strongly associated outcomes related to resilience. So we can see general well-being there at the top, psychological stress. So I should note that resilience influences well-being positively. So as it increases, so does well-being, while it negatively influences stress. So as employee resilience goes up, psychological stress decreases. Okay, so before we think about what managers, people professionals can do to foster resilience amongst their staff, we should first be clear about the nature of resilience. So thinking about whether it's something that people just have and others don't, or whether it can be learned, does it change day to day? So the body of research suggests that to some extent it is a personal trait, so something that's relatively consistent within each person, but to some extent it's also a personal state, something that varies and is affected by context and by behaviors. Excuse me. So some people will have naturally greater amounts of resilience to draw upon than others. But that's clearly not the be all and end all of it. The climates that we work in, our learning and development, the behavior of our colleagues, our managers, these are all things that will affect how resilient we are. However, anecdotally and from experience, the word resilience is often used as if it's a trait. So you've probably heard the words, you just need to be more resilient. And for us, that's not really, it's not really good enough. Whoever says this, whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague, a manager, a fair response would be that your attitude is one of the things that actually affects somebody's resilience. It's not as simple as just being more resilient. So we do find that there are two key areas that can help foster resilience. And these areas, the first area is work climate and relationships. So things like social support.
I'm just listening to the CIPD thing.
So help and advice from managers or co-workers. So things like leader-member exchange as well. So that's positive interpersonal relationships between managers and those who report to them. That's especially important in challenging situations. And then the second area is psychological factors. So things like self-efficacy, which is task-specific confidence, and things that help this are, for example, goal setting, learning and development, witnessing others succeed, and persuasion from colleagues and from managers. And then we have something that's called positive affect, which is kind of enthusiasm, alertness, optimism, and a general cheerfulness. And then finally, there's a sense of coherence for individuals. So That's being able to kind of comprehend big events in your life and find meaning in these and manage them. So there we go. There's just a quick list of the top 5 influences on resilience. So in terms of recommendations then, to managers, we would say help people develop effective work habits and also to be confident in their roles and to understand what's going on in their roles and, you know, their wider, how their role fits with the wider organization goals. So as I said, things like goal setting, seeing their own success and the success of others, and verbal persuasion are all things that can contribute to this. We also recommend that managers help teams build supportive, mutually beneficial relationships and positive, happy, and optimistic environments. And another good angle to explore is the effectiveness of training to build resilience. So we find that training can indeed be effective, especially when it's focused on developing self-awareness, reflection, relaxation, things like mindfulness as well can be really effective. It can also be effective when it's experiential learning based on things like cognitive behavioral therapy. Combining training with other related practices such as coaching, small group discussions, goal setting, things like that can be really effective. And finally, in terms of the amount of training, intensive learning is found to work best. So for example, 10 sessions over a month, something like that. So we have 2 full reports on employee resilience. So we've got a scientific summary, which is more focused on the research methods side of things. And there's a more discursive and practical evidence summary. So as you can see, they're both available on the CIPD website. Do go and have a look at those if you have an interest in employee resilience. Obviously, I've gone over the details there, but there's a lot more to be found in the full papers. So just a couple of questions to ponder for the audience. I'd love to know how these findings sit with you in your work settings. So feel free to put answers to these questions in the chat, and I can come and have a look at them later. We can discuss them in the Q&A. So think about whether you see evidence of these findings in your workplace. So particular questions. So do you see evidence of positive outcomes for resilient employees? For example, better well-being, lower stress, more creativity, better commitment? And do you see evidence for the influences of resilience? So, for example, positive relationships with leaders and colleagues and self-efficacy, things like that. Are there any other factors that you see play a really big role in people being more resilient? So just a couple of questions there to think about as we move into the next section. So the second review that I'll focus on is our work on mental well-being, and in particular, how contemporary ways of working, notably working with digital technology, can influence this. So it's widely assumed that a poor work-life balance, feeling pressure to be always on, and the adoption of virtual working can negatively influence employee well-being, and thus people's ability to contribute to both their professional and their personal life. So in this review, we wanted to focus particularly on 3 areas. So these were drivers and risk factors to employee well-being, the relationship between digital working and well-being, and the effect of management interventions. So if we first look at risk factors then, so over the last few decades, there have been a number of really high quality studies that have been published on factors that predict mental well-being. And so what we've managed to get from this is a consistent view of a wide range of work-related drivers. So the first of these is the nature of our jobs, and this affects mental well-being in various ways. So in particular, mental health is likely to benefit from job control. So things like autonomy is really closely related to this, and empowerment. However, mental health is likely to suffer from things like excessive work demands, long working hours, and things like organizational change. Excuse me. Good work relationships have been highlighted as really important in avoiding mental health problems. So the key factors here are social support, which is obviously a positive influence, and then bullying and conflict, which is a negative influence. And then finally, there are a number of psychological factors that play a really important role. So the main risk factors are a perceived imbalance between effort and reward, and more generally perceived injustice, and then employees' sense of coherence. So as I mentioned earlier, so it's kind of whether you can comprehend events and find meaning in them and can manage those. So there is a growing body of research on work-related technology and digital work, but there is a need for better quality research in this area, at least when it comes to its links with mental health. The body of research that we have currently isn't really strong enough to give confident recommendations, and there are in fact some potentially conflicting findings. For example, that digital communication technology can cause stress, but there are also findings that it can help people to achieve a better work-life balance. So it's not the clearest set of findings there, but this doesn't leave us with nothing on the links between digital work and mental health. So evidence does show that digital working can relate to some of the risk factors that I mentioned earlier, that we do know affect mental well-being. So for example, an excessive volume of emails is clearly a sign of excessive work demands, and we have evidence that that creates anxiety by reducing workers' sense of control, as they fear they will fall behind in their work or miss important information. And then related to this, we also find that expectations or demands to respond swiftly via digital communication, things like email, can be bad for workers' mental health. And finally, we find evidence that information technology can contribute to the tendency to be always on. That's more likely to lead to working longer hours than is necessary or healthy. So yeah, while we wait for more solid, robust research on this area, we can confirm that, or we can recommend that employees would do well to focus on how digital working in their organizations may contribute to some of those well-known mental health risk factors that I mentioned earlier. So finally, management interventions can also help reduce the risk of mental health issues. So the most impactful of these include improving workers' mental health literacy, stress management, resilience training, and contemplative interventions such as mindfulness. However, when compared alongside the risk factors mentioned earlier, we do see that the effect of these interventions is small. So in short then, employers, HR professionals would probably do more for employees' mental health if they targeted actions at reducing those risk factors, as I mentioned. So in terms of recommendations then, we're currently in the process of holding several workshops with practitioners to get a better practitioner involvement in this project and to draw out key recommendations. But there are things that we can recommend so far. So firstly, we recommend that managers and leaders design people's jobs in ways that reduce the identified mental health risk factors. So for example, provide them with autonomy and flexibility with how they choose to work and when they choose to work. We recommend that leaders strengthen workplace relationships in order to avoid mental health issues. So really strong quality relationships where openness and support are encouraged between leaders and their teams and within teams are really important. We also recommend reducing psychological factors that are associated with mental health by fostering the right work climates. So the environments that value rewarding employees and ensure they feel coherence in their roles. And by climate, we mean employees' kind of shared understanding of the practices and the normal behavior on specific aspects of organizational life. Okay, so once again, a couple of questions to think about before we get to the Q&A. So again, feel free to write anything in the chat you like. So just thinking about whether you see evidence again of these findings in your workplace. So to you, what are the strongest risk factors to mental health that you've seen evidence of? And then secondly, have you seen evidence of any particularly effective strategies or interventions? Okay, so the final report that I'll talk about today is focusing on virtual teams. So as I mentioned earlier, so this one kind of relates quite closely to the digital working that we focused on just a minute ago, but it's more focused on the kind of logistical side of virtual teams. And as I said, virtual and global teams are not a new thing, but as they only increase in prevalence as a result of the pandemic, it's really never been so important to know how to manage these teams to the benefit of both the organization and the employees themselves that are part of these teams. So in terms of findings then, so focusing on the challenges of virtual teams, and we found that virtual teams face greater challenges than those who operate face-to-face, especially when larger numbers work apart and when members work further apart in different time zones. We find that using electronic media can be a major challenge because it results in members sharing less information with each other, finding it more difficult to interpret information, and struggling to receive and provide instant feedback. However, we did find that using rich media, so in particular video calls, can help address these issues because they allow feedback to be shared and disputes to be resolved really quickly. Obviously, there are some limitations around video calling, so things like poor quality network, not everybody has the best internet. Some people may not want to have a video call at certain times. But however, we still recommend that managers should encourage their teams to adopt these, and that organizations themselves provide the kind of minimal, the minimum requirements, I suppose you could say, for people to effectively work virtually. So, things like having a good, like a second monitor, making sure everybody's got the kind of space and things like that to effectively work virtually. And we also find that ensuring team members are aware of others' working hours is really important in order to create as large an overlap as possible between working times. And as I said, that's particularly important for teams who are working in different time zones. So building team cohesion and trust is, of course, really important, but it's not a given. It has to be developed in order for teams to be more effective than simply a group of individuals. So social cohesion, which is thinking about people enjoying working together, caring about each other, and generally just getting on well, is directly relevant to a team's effectiveness, particularly in virtual teams. However, it can be a challenge to develop in these teams where members don't get the same social cues as in physical settings. So what's key is developing trust in these teams. So trust can help prevent misunderstandings that are more likely to occur remotely. And trust also helps information sharing, boosts commitment, and helps the team learn more as a collective. So to develop trust and cohesion, we recommend that managers and people professionals firstly try and invest in team building. Ideally, doing something like kicking off with a face-to-face session would be great. Obviously not always possible for some teams, especially new teams who have come together during this pandemic where they've only been able to meet virtually. So creating a session, for example, that's more than just meeting and greeting. So where team members really get to know each other in a meaningful way, share their expectations of each other, think about their job role more specifically and in more detail, and then things like having scheduled catch-up calls and things like team building, games, those sort of things will really make a massive difference for relationships. Managers can also help protect the team from negative behavior. So dishonest communication from a team member, for example, can damage trust and lead to doubt about their intentions. So what managers can do here is detect early on and correct intentionally dishonest communication, distinguishing it from that which is unintentional. And then finally, just being mindful about sharing negative feedback can be important. So if the team is not performing as expected, which may be particularly prevalent now, given the changes to workplaces as a result of the pandemic, team members may see negative feedback as a kind of personal affront, a kind of challenge to their own competence, and this can lead to trust declining. And while sharing feedback is really important, managers ought to consider whether this is truly necessary in certain contexts. And if they deem it necessary, they should make feedback specific and not linked to the team's inherent ability to perform a task. Okay, so sharing information effectively helps teams use individual knowledge and expertise for the wider benefit of the team, as well as helping teams develop a common understanding of their goals and tasks. Sharing information helps build trust and cohesion. However, virtual teams are sometimes less effective at doing this than face-to-face teams. So while members tend to share information about solving problems, they don't share so much information about how to work together and about things like social issues. And this information is really key to the performance of these teams. So there's something called a transactive memory system, which can support information sharing. And this refers to knowledge that is embedded in a team's collective memory. So it kind of works like an indexing system that tells members who knows what in the team. So we recommend that to ensure effective information sharing, managers can, for example, diversify the information shared within a team. So, for example, setting time aside to discuss and share feedback about how the team should collaborate. Also look to build up the team's transactive memory system. So encouraging team members to share their relevant experiences, share kind of what they can bring to the team, and what kind of information that they have, so their team members know who to go to for advice and support. This also helps team members free up their time and resources by being able to pass information along to the person who is the expert in that particular subject. And then finally, holding debriefing sessions sorry about that. Holding debriefing sessions can allow the team to reflect upon their goals, their collaboration, their decision making, their communication. And these sessions can focus on learning and improvement rather than evaluation or judgment, and involve input from multiple participants using at least one source of evidence. So then if we look at team collaboration, teams need to know how to work together in order to be effective. And one way to enhance this is through training. So involving teaching team members about the importance of social support and managing interpersonal conflict among teammates. So teamwork training is generally delivered in 4 different ways. So lectures in a classroom type setting, interactive group workshops, simulations with tryouts and reviews of actual behaviors while the team is at work. And the interactive and experiential formats have been shown to be more effective. And coordination is a really key aspect of teamwork training. So this involves the effort the team members make to manage shared resources and how coherent team members' work activities are. So virtual teams will see particularly strong positive effects of good coordination. So understanding how people communicate, how quickly they're expected to answer, and how explicit the message and feedback is. So to teach teams how to work together, we recommend that managers set up teamwork training sessions that are interactive and allow team members to experience what effective teamwork looks like. This can take place over video. Clarify people's roles. So as I mentioned before, kind of getting a sense of what everybody can bring to the team can be really important. And in virtual teams, this may have to be done in a more directive manner than in a face-to-face team to ensure clarity of roles. Then we also recommend providing tools for coordination. So virtual teams may need more tools such as project management software to ensure they can effectively coordinate. And then finally, managers can coordinate the team's communication by allowing team members to set rules for communication from the beginning. So, for example, when to hold weekly update meetings. Okay, so finally on virtual teams, there's mixed evidence on how virtual teams are best led. So a transactional leader, so somebody who focuses on tasks and giving a team direction, might allow team members to coordinate better to solve said task. However, a transformational leader who focuses on the vision and takes risks might enhance social cohesion and improve the team's creativity and quality of results. Irrespective of the approach that the leader takes, one really important aspect of effective leaders is humility. So being self-aware, willing to learn, and having appreciation for others allows this type of leader to make their make the members of their team feel psychologically safe. So we recommend then, when selecting virtual leaders, managers, HR practitioners should focus on two things in particular. So find the leader that's the best fit for the challenge. So for example, if a team's targets focus on output quantity over service quality, a more directive task-focused leader may be required. Whereas if the team aims for high quality creative results, a leader who focuses on vision may be more effective. And then finally, as I mentioned, identifying a humble leader to provide virtual teams with a greater likelihood of success can be really important. Okay, so a lot of information there. I appreciate that. So our mental health, mental well-being and digital work report that I mentioned second there hasn't actually been published yet. It's due to come out in July. However, there are a number of other publications you can access through our website. So we've looked at loads of organizational topics, looking at things like engagement, ethics, virtual teams, as I mentioned there, which you can see, inclusion and diversity, and our resilience report is one of those. So and virtual teams, as I mentioned, and we're also in the process of developing a CIPD evidence hub, which will house all of these various documents in their different forms. So as I mentioned, we have we have kind of different levels of detail in our reports. So we have really rigorous scientific summaries, we have more discursive evidence summaries, and then we have things like key recommendations, practical takeaways, videos, those sort of things. So those will all be housed on the CIPD Evidence Hub, which is a really exciting thing. And we encourage you to have a look at that when it's out later this summer. So just a couple of links there if you want to learn a bit more about evidence-based practice and the kind of approach that we take with these evidence reviews. And that's all from me on the content side of things. I feel like I've been talking for hours. So over to the audience. If there are any questions, I'll have a look through the chat and see. I don't know if.
Thanks very much, Jake. That was really
No
good.
worries.
We had a question, just a reminder, what is JDR?
Oh, JDR. So JDR is job demands resources model. So it's I should remember this. I was just talking about it. So it's the idea of that we have various resources. We have various resources that are used up when we have excessive work demands, things like that. And I think it was that if we are more resilient employees, we'll be able to recoup these resources better than those who are less resilient, in order to kind of deal with the the demands that we face in organizations. Hopefully that kind of answers it. With all of these, I can, these things are discussed in much greater detail in the reports themselves. So I really encourage everybody to have a good look at those.
Yeah, thanks for that. Lorraine's actually just made a point. She sees a lot of lip service, but when employees are ill or we have high numbers of stress, it is not supported effectively.
So a lot of lip service in organizations. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just reading it as well.
Yeah.
So that's, sorry, go on.
We've got from Ailsa, I agree with absences relating to mental health issues not being reported effectively for a number of reasons relating to workplace stigma, etc.
Okay. Again, apologies, I'm just reading it. So on the first point about lip service, I don't know if that's, you know, kind of an excuse me, an organizational thing, or if it's, you know, managers saying that they support these things and then not really following through on their rhetoric.
Hi, sorry, it's Lorraine here.
Yeah.
I think it was really in response to the question that you mentioned in terms of, you know, what was the sort of how do companies react, and I just find that quite often the companies might put in process some of the training and things like that, but when you've actually got people who are ill with high numbers of stress, or somebody's being signed off through stress and things, I don't feel that the organisation really takes it seriously enough and does enough for them. I think, you know, it's just a tick box exercise, really.
Yeah. And that's where I think with a lot of these kind of things, you need not only, it's really important to get buy-in to these things from people who are higher up in the organization, you know, get people to use the power that they have and their resources in order to push these things, but it kind of trickles down from there, and then it's about empowering people managers to be able to actually affect change, rather than feeling like they're kind of hamstrung by various organizational processes. So yeah, it's not, maybe not as easy as that, but I think those are really important things.
Sure.
If I'm looking at the so it was I agree with absences relating to mental health issues not being reported effectively. I don't know if that was something I mentioned or if that was for a number of reasons related to workplace stigma.
Hi, Elsa here. I made that comment. I was just kind of agreeing with Lorraine that I think a lot of organisations pay lip service, like you said. It's that tick box exercise, saying all the right things, but actually when it comes to the reality of managing people who are dealing with issues on a day-to-day basis, it's very different. But also I think that, you know, culture has an impact, and also, you know, how employees actually feel if they are able to talk to their manager, to talk to HR and actually be honest about what they are going through, you know. So there is that stigma, you know, about telling people what you're going through, and you know, just being honest and transparent about it, and sort of anticipating a reaction, if you like. I think that was my point. Yeah,
and I think that's, like you said, that's where the environment, the culture that is that's where that becomes really important, and the relationships that people have, especially with their colleagues and their managers. You know, if managers are able to create an environment in their team where people can be open, then it's hopefully much more likely that people don't feel like there's a stigma around, you know, coming out and telling people about the various mental health issues that they have. I don't know if there were any more questions. I'm just having a look through. Excuse me. So there's another point on from Lorraine, which was regular video calls and a weekly coffee break have individuals across the country working on projects, as this helps getting to know each other better. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you covered it. It was just really, again, in answer to that, have you seen evidence of any particular effective strategies or interventions? So that, and I think you then went on and covered those areas anyway.
But I think that is something that people have massively appreciated in this pandemic time. people have maybe underestimated how important it can be just to touch base with your team every now and again. I actually did some work on multicultural teams and global teams and found that this was, again, no surprise, it's similar to virtual teams and teams working remotely.
I think what we found quite interesting is we have a virtual team across different countries, and we've been working quite well together prior to the pandemic, and we used to meet up once a year for a big team event and training. However, with the pandemic, we turned our video cameras on, and we did things like murder mysteries online, and because of the coffee chat catch up, we got to know each other better during the pandemic and worked a lot better together than we did prior, which was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, it's people have probably been taking that for granted, being able to kind of have those conversations. And I think I read recently about even seeing what's behind people and having that as a kind of conversation starter, and as intrusive as it can be to some people, for others it's really kind of I don't know, kind of not liberating, but really nice to just see a kind of another side of their teammates, not just as colleagues, but as parents, as carers, things like that. And I think that's been really important in these times. I don't know if we had any more questions. How it looks like we're near the end of time. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Are you planning, Jake, to review this in a couple of years' time again when things become more normal, or as normal as can be nowadays? Is it going to be are you going to seek further evidence as you go along, or?
So in terms of how these things are developing?
Yeah, as we go back into more of a kind of a hybrid working situation.
Oh yeah.
How things continue.
Yeah, I mean, for a start, as I mentioned, we collaborate with SEBMA on these things, so that's Centre for Evidence-Based Management. They're constantly doing these evidence reviews on these really relevant and important topics, so we'll definitely continue collaborating with them. And I think just from a kind of, in the last year and a half, everything the CIPD's put out has been, it's had a COVID focus.
Yeah.
So I think as things change, and as we move forward, we'll only kind of look at this stuff more closely, and it will be really interesting to look back on these things in a couple of years' time and see kind of how things have changed as well.
Yeah. Lisa's just asking, can you remind us where we can access the reports again on the website?
Yeah, so it's a shame they're not all housed in one place. The aim is that they will be housed in one place, as I mentioned, in the near future when we have the evidence hub. So at the moment they are all just at different website addresses. They are all on the CIPD website. I actually stupidly didn't have the virtual teams address. I actually didn't make a note of the virtual teams address. But yeah, long story short, they are on the CIPD website. Most of them, it's kind of as simple as just Googling like CIPD employee resilience, and you'll be able to find it, CIPD virtual teams, and you'll be able to find them. So yeah, not the most helpful of answers, apologies, but they are easy enough to find. And as I said, we will have them all in one place soon.
Yeah, and we're able to send the slides and also a copy of the recording for anyone that wishes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jay. I found that really interesting and look forward to actually going into it in more detail and having a look on the website.
Yeah,
And,
no, thanks so much.
I'm sure we'll send you more questions after that once we've also had a look at the details on there.
Yes, my details should be on the screen. If any contact me on LinkedIn or anything, go ahead. Yeah, thanks so much for letting me chat. And as I said, if anybody wants, please do look at these in more detail because there's a lot of information there. So thank you.
On behalf of the branch, just thanks very much again. And as I say, I'm sure we'll have a few questions coming through and lots of great topics and tips within there. And for the branch, this is our last session of this program year, and we'll be restarting again in September. So information will come out over the summer. So have a lovely summer, everyone. And let's hope we have some good weather for our staycation.